The hull screamed before the alarms did. I was elbow-deep in the coolant relay when the first impact hit the larkspur, and the whole floor dropped like someone had pulled the deck out from under my boots. Sparks bit into my arm. I swallowed a word that would have gotten me in trouble back home and kept my hands moving, because if I stopped moving, the reactor stopped cooling, and if the reactor stopped cooling, none of us would need to worry about anything ever again. "Marsh, status," came the voice through my earpiece. Flat, steady, not even a hint of strain in it, even though the ship was shaking apart around all of us. That was Commander Elira Voss. Of course it was. She never sounded like anything other than a woman reading a weather report, even when the weather was enemy fire. "Working on it," I said, twisting a coupling into place with fingers that did not want to cooperate. "Give me 40 seconds. You have 20. Then give me a miracle instead." There was no answer to that. Virolith didn't do sarcasm. Or rather, they understood it as a data point, filed it away, and moved on without comment. I had learned that the hard way in my first month aboard, back when I still thought a joke might get a laugh out of someone on this ship. Another impact rocked the corridor. Somewhere above me, Oliver Finch was screaming coordinates into the comm, and Grace Bellamy was answering him just as fast, and underneath all of it, the ship's old bones groaned like they were tired of being asked to survive one more day. We were a scout crew. Small ship, smaller crew, mostly human with a scattering of Virolith officers assigned to keep an eye on us, or so the official story went. The real story was that humans were still new enough to the wider galaxy that nobody quite trusted us to fly anything bigger than a shuttle without supervision. So the Virolith supervised, coolly, precisely, without so much as raising their voice, even when 3 raiders decloaked off our port side and started using the larkspur for target practice. 15 seconds, Marsh. I heard you the first time. I got the coupling locked. The relay hissed, then steadied, then hummed the way it was supposed to hum. I slammed the access panel shut and hauled myself upright just as the ship lurched again, hard enough that I had to grab the wall to stay standing. "Coolant stable," I said into the comm, breathing like I'd run a mile. "You're clear to push the reactor to full without cooking us." "Understood." I heard her relay the order to Oliver. I heard the pitch of the engines change, felt it in my teeth, that particular vibration that meant the larkspur was about to do something reckless. A heartbeat later, the whole ship rolled hard to starboard, and through the small viewport at the end of the corridor, I caught a flash of one of the raiders spinning away, trailing fire. "Nice flying," I muttered, mostly to myself. "That was not flying," Illyra said. Apparently my earpiece was still open. That was a calculated maneuver based on their weapon recharge cycle. "Sure. Nice calculated maneuver then." Another silence. I was starting to recognize her silences, the way you learn to recognize a person's tone of voice. This one meant she was choosing not to respond to something she found unnecessary. I liked poking at that particular silence more than I probably should have. The second raider came around for another pass, and this time the impact threw me clean off my feet. I hit the deck shoulder first, pain lighting up bright and sharp, and for a second, the corridor tilted sideways in a way corridors are not supposed to tilt. Emergency lighting kicked in, painting everything red. "Marsh." Her voice again, and for the first time all day there was something underneath the flatness. Not quite worry. Virolith did not worry, not out loud, not where anyone could hear it, but something had changed in the shape of the word. "I'm up," I said, dragging myself back to my feet, testing my shoulder. It ached, but it worked. "I'm fine. Coolant's holding." "Confirm your position." "Corridor 9, near the aft relay." "Why you planning on visiting?" "I am reviewing the ship's structural integrity." Corridor 9 took the worst of that last impact. Of course she was. Not worried about me, worried about the ship. That was Illyra Voss for you, precise to the last detail, cataloging damage in the middle of a firefight like she had all the time in the world. The third raider peeled off from formation, and for a moment I thought that might be it, that maybe they'd decided we weren't worth the trouble. Then it came in low and fast, weapons already charging, and I heard Grace shout something over the comm that was not calm at all. "Brace," Elira said, and there was no time to ask brace for what. Before the larkspur bucked so hard, the ceiling panel above me came loose and swung down on its hinge, catching me across the back of the head, hard enough to see stars. I don't remember deciding to say it. That's the truth of it, if I'm being honest with myself. My ears were ringing, my shoulder was throbbing, there was a warm trickle of blood at my hairline, and somewhere above me the ship's commander was fighting to keep us all alive with that same maddening calm she always had, and something about the whole absurd, terrifying, exhausting shape of the moment just came loose in me, the same way that ceiling panel had. "Thanks, sweet," I said into the comm, half a laugh in my voice, the kind of thing that would have gotten an eye roll from any of my crewmates back home. Couldn't have survived that without you. I didn't even think about it. It was just a thing my mother used to say to my father across the kitchen table, a thing an old friend used to say when I brought her coffee in the mornings, a small, soft, human noise that meant nothing more than gratitude wrapped in warmth. There was no response. Not immediately. And in the middle of a battle, in the middle of alarms and impacts and the ship groaning under strain, a few seconds of silence should not have meant anything at all. People go quiet in a crisis. That's normal. That's expected. But this silence had a texture to it. I felt it more than heard it, a kind of held breath coming through an open comm channel from a woman who, as far as I knew, did not breathe like that, did not hold anything, did not hesitate, not once, not in the 4 months I had served under her command. "Commander?" I said, when the quiet stretched a beat too long. "You still there?" Static. Then her voice came back, and it was not flat anymore. "Say that again," she said. And for the first time since I had come aboard the Larkspur, Commander Elira Voss sounded like she did not know what to do with herself. I did not have time to think about what had just happened, because the ship chose that exact moment to remind us we were still under attack. Another impact rattled the hull, smaller this time, glancing rather than direct, and Oliver's voice cut through the comm sounding half relieved and half panicked. "2 raiders retreating, 1 still inbound, weapons hot. Marsh, get to the auxiliary shield node, corridor 12, Elira said. And just like that, her voice had snapped back into its usual iron shape, clipped and efficient, as if the last 30 seconds had never happened at all. "Grace can reroute power if you manually reset the breaker." "On it," I said, already moving, ignoring the throb in my skull and the warm trickle at my hairline. Whatever strange crack had opened up in the commander's composure, it had closed again fast, and there wasn't room in my head to chase it while the ship was still fighting for its life. I ran the length of 2 corridors, ducked under a half-collapsed support beam, and found the auxiliary node exactly where Grace said it would be, buried behind a service panel that had partly popped its hinges from the last hit. I wrenched it open, found the breaker fused half shut, and had to use the flat of a spanner to force it back into position while sparks danced against my knuckles. "Breakers reset," I said. "Grace, you should have power now." "Copy that, rerouting," she said. A second later, the lights in my section flickered back to full strength, and somewhere above me I heard the dull thrum of the shields recharging. The last raider made one more pass. I felt it more than saw it, the whole ship shuddering as the shields absorbed the hit instead of the hull, and then, almost anticlimactically, silence. Not the tense, ringing silence of a held breath, but the real thing. No more impacts, no more alarms, just the low hum of a ship that had, against reasonable odds, survived. "Raider is breaking off," Oliver said. I could hear the grin creeping into his voice, even through the comm. "Repeat, hostile is breaking off. We are clear." Cheering broke out somewhere on the bridge, muffled by distance and bulkheads but unmistakable. I let myself slide down against the wall of the corridor, spanner still in hand, and allowed exactly one long breath of relief before duty caught up with me again. "Damage report," Elira said, and there it was again, That same flat control, like nothing at all had cracked in her a few minutes earlier. I gave her the coolant status. Grace gave her the shield status. Oliver gave her the engine status. One by one the crew checked in, and one by one Alira acknowledged each report with the same even tone, filing away every detail, already 3 steps ahead into repairs and next moves. By the time I made it up to the bridge, favoring my bruised shoulder, you would never have known anything unusual had happened at all. Except for the way she looked at me when I walked in. It was brief. If I had blinked, I might have missed it entirely. But for just a moment, before she smoothed her expression back into its usual composed lines, Alira Voss looked at me the way you look at something you cannot quite explain to yourself. Her eyes lingered half a second too long on the cut above my hairline, then flicked away, and a faint shift moved across her skin, a subtle deepening of color along her jaw and the backs of her hands that I had never once seen on her before. Virolith skin did that. I knew that much from the little cultural briefing they'd given us before assignment. It shifted with strong biological reactions, the same way human skin might flush or pale. I had seen it happen to other Virolith crew before, mostly during moments of genuine alarm, the kind of reaction that came before their training kicked in and smoothed it away. I had never seen it happen to her. "Commander," I said carefully, because some instinct told me not to make a joke out of it. "Not yet. You good?" "I am undamaged," she said, which was not actually an answer to what I'd asked, but I let it go, because the bridge was still busy with the aftermath of a battle, and this did not feel like the time. It felt like the time about 6 hours later, though, when I was sitting in the mess hall nursing a mug of something that was technically coffee, and definitely not good coffee, and Grace Bellamy slid into the seat across from me with an expression I did not like one bit. "So," she said, "so what? So you called Commander Voss sweet over an open comm channel during a firefight." I nearly choked on my terrible coffee. "It was an accident. It just slipped out. It's a thing my mother says. Uh-huh." Grace was grinning now, the particular grin of someone who has found gossip too good to let go of. And then she asked you to say it again. That was different. She was probably just confused. Bad audio, maybe. Or she thought I said something else. "Ethan." Grace leaned forward, elbows on the table, delight practically radiating off her. Half the bridge crew heard it. Her skin changed color. Virolith skin only does that during genuine emotional spikes. That's basic biology. They teach us that in the cultural orientation. "You broke the Ice Queen." Don't call her that. Everyone calls her that. Behind her back, obviously, because nobody's got a death wish. But Ethan, listen to me. In 4 years of service, I have never once seen Commander Voss react to anything. Not battle damage, not casualties, not the time Oliver nearly flew us into an asteroid field. Nothing. And you called her sweet, by accident, and she asked you to say it again. I stared down into my coffee like it might have an answer in it. It did not. "It doesn't mean anything," I said, mostly to convince myself. "Virolith don't do feelings the way we do. Maybe it was some kind of translation glitch in her earpiece. Maybe the word triggered some old data file about human customs, and she was just curious." "Maybe," Grace said, in the tone of someone who did not believe that for 1 second. "Or maybe you should ask her yourself." I did not ask her myself. Not that day, and not the day after, mostly because Commander Voss did an excellent job of being everywhere on the ship, except wherever I happened to be. I told myself that was normal, that a commanding officer had 100 things to attend to after a battle, hull repairs, and crew debriefs, and reports to file with Fleet Command about the engagement. I told myself it had nothing to do with me. That story held up for about 3 days. On the 4th day, I was elbow deep in a maintenance conduit near engineering, running a diagnostic on a relay that had been acting up since the fight, when I heard the particular cadence of boots that I had come to recognize as hers. Even, measured, unhurried. I did not look up right away, mostly because I had learned that if I looked too eager to talk to her, she found some reason to be somewhere else within about 10 seconds. Marsh. Commander. I kept my eyes on the diagnostic readout, though my ears were absolutely tuned to every word she said. Something I can help you with. I am conducting a routine inspection of the aft systems. Right. Routine. I let a beat pass. This is the third routine inspection you've conducted in this exact corridor this week. Her silence had a different texture this time, not the held breath kind from the battle, something closer to a person caught doing something they had not planned on being caught doing. The relay damage from the engagement requires ongoing monitoring, she said, which was true, technically, but did not explain why she was the one monitoring it, instead of delegating it the way she delegated basically everything else that was not strategy or command decisions. I closed the access panel and finally turned to look at her properly. She was standing a few feet away, posture as perfect as ever, hands folded behind her back in that formal way of hers, and there was something in the set of her jaw that looked almost like nervousness, if Virolith did, nervousness, which according to every briefing document I had ever read, they absolutely did not. Commander, I said, can I ask you something? You may ask. Back during the fight, when I called you sweet, I watched her carefully as I said it, and there it was again, that faint shift of color along her jaw, quick and involuntary, gone almost as fast as it appeared. Why'd you ask me to say it again? For a long moment she did not answer. Her eyes, a pale, unsettling shade of silver gray that I had never quite gotten used to, held mine with an intensity that made my chest feel tight in a way I did not have a good explanation for. I do not have a satisfactory answer to that question, she said finally, and her voice had lost some of its usual crispness, gone soft and careful in a way I had never heard from her before. The word triggered a physiological response I have not previously experienced. My training does not account for it. I find that troubling. Troubling how? I am the highest-ranking officer on this vessel, she said, and there was something almost defensive in it now, like she was reminding herself as much as me. My composure is not incidental. It is required. Virolith command structure depends on emotional restraint at every level, and I have maintained that restraint without deviation for 11 years of service. And then I said a word and it deviated. Yes. The bluntness of it startled a short laugh out of me before I could stop it, and immediately I worried that had been the wrong reaction, that I had somehow mocked something she clearly considered serious. But she did not pull back or grow cold. If anything, something in her shoulders eased slightly, like she had been braced for a worse response and was relieved not to receive it. For what it's worth, I said, gentler now, I didn't mean anything by it. It just slipped out. It's a habit from home, a soft word for someone you're grateful to, someone you care about. It doesn't carry the weight you might be assuming it does. And yet, she said, it produced this reaction in me regardless of your intention. I did not have a response for that. Neither apparently did she, because we stood there in the narrow, humming corridor for a long moment, neither of us quite willing to be the one to walk away first. I should return to the bridge, she said eventually, and it sounded less like a decision and more like an escape route she had been searching for the whole conversation. Sure, I said, routine inspections and all that. The ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed her face before she turned and walked away, and I stood there in the corridor, a good while longer than the diagnostic actually required, replaying the whole strange exchange in my head and wondering exactly what I had stumbled into. I would find out soon enough that I was not the only one who had noticed. Word travels fast on a small ship, and it travels even faster when the person at the center of the story is someone nobody ever expected to be interesting. Within a week, I could not walk into the mess hall without at least one crew member finding some flimsy excuse to sit near me and ask, in tones of studied casualness, about the incident with the commander. Most of the humans on board treated it as entertainment, which I suppose was fair. Grace had appointed herself the unofficial chronicler of what she now called the sweet incident, and Oliver kept a running tally on a data slate of how many times he had seen Illyra glance in my direction during briefings, a number that had apparently climbed into double digits by the end of the first week. The Virolith crew reacted differently, and it took me a while to understand why. Dr. Ren Sable was the ship's chief science officer, a Virolith with an unusually open curiosity about human behavior that set him apart from most of his species. He found me in the observation lounge one evening, staring out at the slow drift of stars, and settled into the seat beside me without waiting for an invitation, which for a Virolith was practically an act of rebellion. "You are the one who caused the commander's reaction," he said, not quite a question. "I didn't cause anything. It was an accident. An accident with significant consequences." He tilted his head, studying me the way he might study a specimen under a scanner. "I have served alongside Commander Voss for 6 years. I have observed her decline promotions to Fleet Command specifically because they would require public displays of emotional expression she considered beneath her discipline. I have observed her remain composed through the loss of an entire away team. I have never observed her ask anyone to repeat themselves." "Maybe I just got lucky with the timing," I said, though even as I said it, it sounded thin. "Perhaps," Ren said, "or perhaps you touched something that our culture has spent centuries training itself not to touch." I turned to look at him properly. There was nothing accusatory in his tone, only a kind of careful fascination, the sort a scientist might have for an experiment producing unexpected results. "What do you mean, trained itself?" Ren was quiet for a moment, considering how much to say. "You have been told, I assume, that Virolith value emotional restraint. This is true, but it understates the matter considerably. Several centuries ago, our species nearly destroyed itself in a series of conflicts driven by what your records would call passionate leadership. Rulers who acted on feeling rather than calculation. Wars begun in anger, ended in grief, repeated in vengeance. When the restructuring came, after the worst of it, our society decided that feeling itself was the flaw to be corrected, not the wars, the feeling that led to them. That sounds like a rough way to run a civilization. It has kept us stable for a very long time," Ren said. "Stability was the priority. Feeling was the cost. Most of us do not consider it a cost at all anymore, because we were never taught to want anything different. But Commander Voss comes from a lineage that was particularly prominent during the era of conflict. Her family line has spent generations proving its discipline precisely because its ancestors were among the worst offenders. She has more to prove than most, and further to fall if she is seen to fail at it." That put a different weight on everything. I thought about the way she had looked at me in the corridor, defensive and almost frightened underneath the careful words about troubling reactions and required composure, and I understood a little better what it might have cost her to admit any of it out loud. "So when I called her sweet," I said slowly, "that wasn't just an odd word to her. It was something her whole species has spent centuries training itself to be immune to." "Yes," Ren said, "and she was not immune to it. I imagine that frightens her considerably more than any battle." I did not know what to do with that information, so for the next several days I did what I always did with things I did not know how to handle. I threw myself into work. There was plenty of it. The engagement had left the Larkspur with a long list of repairs, and I spent long hours in the engine bay and the relay conduits, hands busy, mind mostly quiet, or at least quiet enough that I could pretend I wasn't thinking about silver-gray eyes and skin that darkened at the sound of one soft word. Illyra, for her part, seemed to be running the same strategy in reverse. She threw herself into command duties with even more precision than usual, if that was possible, running drills, reviewing tactical simulations, holding briefings that ran longer than they needed to. I noticed she made a point of addressing me only by rank and surname during those briefings, clipped and formal, as if daring anyone in the room to suggest there was anything unusual between us. It might have stayed that way, two people carefully avoiding each other around the edges of a small ship, if not for the arrival of High Marshal Thessaly Corps. The ship's internal comm announced the docking of an inbound fleet vessel 3 days after Wren's conversation with me, and within the hour, word had spread that it was carrying a ranking Virilith official conducting a review of border engagements, including ours. I did not think much of it at first. Fleet command reviews were common enough after any engagement with raiders, routine paperwork dressed up in official robes. I changed my mind the moment I saw High Marshal Kor walk onto the bridge. She moved like someone who had never once in her life doubted that a room belonged to her the second she entered it. Tall, even by Virilith standards, with pale gray eyes so cold they made Alira's look almost warm by comparison, and a bearing that radiated the kind of authority that came from decades spent enforcing rules rather than simply following them. "Commander Voss," she said, in greeting, and there was something in the way she said the name that made the temperature of the room drop several degrees. "I have reviewed the engagement logs. Your tactical decisions were sound, commendable even." "Thank you, High Marshal. I have also reviewed the communication logs." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing I had heard on that bridge since the raider attack itself. I felt my stomach drop somewhere around my boots, and beside me I saw Grace go very still, the way you go still when you realize a predator has noticed you. "I am aware of the incident," Kor continued, her eyes moving slowly across the assembled crew until they landed, deliberately, on me. "A human specialist addressed you with an endearment during active combat, and you requested he repeat it. Your biological readings during that exchange, which are logged automatically as part of command oversight, show a significant deviation from baseline restraint." Alira did not flinch. I will give her that. Whatever storm might have been happening underneath her skin, her posture stayed perfectly straight, her hands folded exactly as they always were, her voice level when she answered. "The exchange was inconsequential to ship operations," she said. "It did not affect my performance during the engagement, as the outcome of that engagement demonstrates." "That is not the concern," Kor said. "The concern is precedent. Your family line has served fleet command for 11 generations, specifically because of its demonstrated discipline. A single deviation, however inconsequential you consider it, becomes a data point. Data points become patterns. Patterns become justifications for those who argue our restraint doctrine is unnecessary, or worse, harmful. I trust you understand the weight of what I am describing." "I understand it precisely, High Marshal. Then I trust you will ensure there is no repetition of the incident." It was not phrased as a question, and Alira did not answer it as one. She simply inclined her head, the smallest possible acknowledgement, and Kor seemed satisfied enough with that to move on to the actual business of her review, running through supply requisitions and repair timelines with the same cold efficiency she had brought to everything else. I stood at the back of the bridge through the rest of that meeting feeling like I had swallowed a stone. It had not occurred to me, in all the days of Grace's teasing and Wren's careful cultural explanations, that any of this could actually cost Alira something real. I had thought of it as an oddity, a curiosity, maybe even something sweet in its own strange way. I had not thought of it as a threat to 11 generations of family, standing enforced by someone with the power and the will to make good on that threat. I caught Alira alone later that evening, in the same corridor where we'd first talked properly, near the relay she kept finding excuses to inspect. She was standing very still, staring at nothing in particular, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked tired. "Commander." "Marsh." She did not turn immediately. "This is not a good time." I heard what the High Marshal said. "Then you understand why this conversation should not continue." "I understand why you might think that," I said carefully, "but I'd like to hear it from you instead of guessing." She turned then, and the look on her face was not the careful composure I had come to expect, nor the flustered uncertainty from our last real conversation. It was something harder, something that looked almost like resignation. "My family has spent 11 generations proving that the mistakes of our ancestors do not run in our blood," she said. "I was raised from childhood to understand that any deviation from discipline would not be seen as a personal failing. It would be seen as evidence that the flaw persists. that the restructuring failed. That people like my ancestors are still capable of leading civilizations into ruin because they cannot govern their own feelings. That's an awful lot of weight to put on one person. It is the weight I was born into, she said simply. I do not resent it. I understand its purpose. But I also understand what the High Marshal is telling me, which is that I cannot afford to be curious about whatever this is. Whatever reaction your presence produces in me, I cannot afford it, and more importantly, I should not want it. Should not, I said, or do not. She did not answer that. Not directly, but her eyes held mine for a long moment, silver gray and searching, and something in the set of her jaw told me the honest answer and the required answer were not the same thing at all. I have duties to attend to, she said finally, and walked away before I could find the words to stop her. I stood there a long time after she left, turning the whole conversation over in my head, and I thought about Ren's story of wars fought over feeling, and Kor's cold eyes measuring deviation like a disease, and Illyra's careful, practiced composure cracking just slightly every time I said one small human word to her. I thought about how strange it was that something as gentle as a nickname could feel, on this ship, like diffusing a bomb. I did not know yet how much more dangerous things were about to get, or how soon I would find out exactly what Illyra Voss was willing to risk when it actually mattered. The trouble started 3 days after High Marshal Kor's fleet vessel departed, and it started the way most trouble does, without any warning at all. We were running a routine supply escort through a debris field near the edge of contested space, the kind of mission the Larkspur had done a dozen times before without incident. I was in the cargo bay checking manifest seals when the ship's proximity alarm went off, sharp and sudden, and Illyra's voice came over the comm with an edge in it I had not heard since the raider attack. All hands, brace for evasive maneuvers. Unidentified vessels decloaking off starboard bow. I dropped what I was doing and grabbed the nearest handhold just as the Larkspur banked hard, the whole cargo bay tilting sideways with the force of it. Crates shifted against their restraints, groaning, and somewhere above me I heard Oliver swearing at his console in a way that told me this was not going to be a short fight. "Report," Illyra said. "3 vessels. Configuration doesn't match anything in our database," Grace said, voice tight. "They're not raiders. They're too organized. This looks military." "Who's military?" "Working on it." I made my way toward engineering as fast as the shifting deck allowed, because if this was going to be a fight, coolant was going to be the first thing to fail again, and I did not intend to let that happen twice. I had barely made it through the connecting corridor when the first hit landed, and this one was worse than anything from the raider engagement. An impact so hard it threw me clean off my feet and into the bulkhead. I tasted blood. My ears rang. Somewhere in the chaos I heard Illyra's voice, still steady, still giving orders, and I forced myself upright and kept moving. The fight that followed was the worst thing I had lived through in my 4 months aboard the Larkspur. Whoever the attackers were, they knew exactly what they were doing, hitting our shields in a coordinated pattern designed to wear them down faster than they could regenerate. I spent the better part of 20 minutes buried in the engine bay, hands raw, rerouting power from every system I could spare to keep the shields from collapsing entirely, while the ship shook and groaned and alarms screamed from every direction. "Shields at 30%, Grace called out. "I don't know how much longer we can hold." "Marsh, I need more power," Illyra said. "There isn't more to give," I shouted back, sweat stinging my eyes. "I've already pulled from life support on the lower decks. We're running on fumes as it is." "Then find fumes somewhere else." I found them, barely. I rerouted power from a section of the ship that was not supposed to be able to give any more, and the shields held another few minutes, and those few minutes were enough for Oliver to thread us through a gap in the debris field that the attacking ships could not follow as easily. For a moment, just a moment, I thought we might actually pull through. Then the hull breach alarm went off in Section 7, and everything got much worse. Section 7 was near the aft relay, the same corridor I had been repairing during the raider attack weeks earlier, and it was also, I realized with a cold drop in my stomach exactly where the emergency evacuation route ran for anyone trying to reach the escape pods from the bridge. I heard Elira call out orders for a damage control team, and then, a moment later, I heard her tell Oliver she was heading there herself. "Commander, that's not your job," I said into the comm, already moving that direction myself, driven by some instinct I did not stop to examine. "Send a team. The team is occupied with the shield relay. I am closest. This is not a discussion, Marsh." I got to Section 7 just as she did, and what greeted us was not good. The hull breach had been contained by an emergency seal, but the seal was failing, buckling under the pressure differential, and beyond it I could see, through the reinforced viewport, one of the attacking vessels lining up for another pass directly at that exact section of the ship. "They're targeting the breach," I said. "They know it's weak." "Then we reinforce it," Illyra said, already moving toward the emergency panel, hands flying over controls with the same steady precision she brought to everything. "Marsh, the support brace, second locker on your left." I got the brace out and helped her wedge it into place against the buckling seal, both of us working fast, hands nearly touching more than once in the cramped space. The ship rocked again, another impact somewhere else on the hull, and the seal groaned under the strain. "It's not going to hold through another direct hit," I said. "It does not need to hold through another hit. It needs to hold long enough for Finch to get us clear." As if summoned by her words, the whole ship lurched into a hard turn, engines screaming, and through the viewport I saw the attacking vessel's shot go wide, missing the hull by what looked like a matter of meters. For a second, I let myself believe we had gotten away with it. Then the second attacking vessel, the one nobody had been watching because everyone's attention was on the first, fired from an angle none of us had accounted for, and the hit landed almost exactly where we were standing. I do not remember deciding to move. I remember the flash of light, the roar of tearing metal, and then Elira's hands on my shoulders, shoving me hard toward the corridor behind us with a strength I did not know she had, putting her own body between me and the section of hull that gave way a half-second later. The blast threw both of us down the corridor. I hit the deck hard, pain exploding through my already bruised shoulder, and for a moment, the world was nothing but ringing silence and the smell of scorched metal. When my vision cleared, I saw Elira a few feet away, not moving. A dark patch of what I realized with horror was Virolith blood spreading across her side. "Lyra," I did not use rank. I did not think to. I scrambled across the buckled deck, plating to reach her, hands shaking as I checked for a pulse. Found one, weak but there. "Elira, come on, stay with me." Her eyes opened, unfocused for a moment, then found mine. "Report," she said, voice barely above a whisper, and even half-conscious and bleeding on the deck of a dying ship. She was still trying to run this like a command briefing, and something about that broke something loose in my chest. "Section sealed. We're clear of the breach," I said, pressing my hands against the wound the way the basic field medic training had taught me, trying to slow the bleeding. "Medical's on the way. I called it in the second you went down. You need to hold on." "The ship. Is the ship secure? Forget the ship for 1 second, would you?" My voice cracked on it, rougher than I meant it to be. "You just took a hit meant for me. You could have gotten clear." "Why didn't you get clear?" "Calculated," she murmured, and even in that state there was a ghost of something wry in it. The odds favored protecting the crew member closest to the point of impact. "That's a lie, and you know it." Her eyes held mine, glassy with pain but present, still fighting to stay focused. "Perhaps," she admitted, so quietly I almost did not catch it over the alarms still blaring around us. "Perhaps it was not entirely calculated." I heard footsteps then, the medical team finally arriving, and I knew I had only seconds before they took her from me to the med bay, seconds before this strange, fragile, half-spoken moment would be swallowed up by procedure and protocol and all the careful distance we had both been keeping since High Marshal Corps' visit. I do not know what made me say it. Maybe it was the fear still hammering through my chest. Maybe it was the blood on my hands. Maybe it was simply that some truths only come out when you believe you might be about to lose the chance to say them at all. "Sweet," I said, low and rough, and entirely without thinking this time. No accident in it at all. "Don't you dare do that again. Don't you dare put yourself between me and anything ever again without telling me first." Her breath caught. Even bleeding, even fading toward unconsciousness as the medical team reached us and began working with fast, practiced hands. I saw the color shift along her jaw, dark and unmistakable, and her lips moved around something that might have been a word, might have been my name, might have been nothing at all, as the medics lifted her onto a stretcher and rushed her away down the corridor. I stood there afterward in the wreckage of Section 7, hands still red, ears still ringing, and for a long time I could not make myself move. She survived. I would not learn the full extent of it until hours later, pacing outside the medbay while Grace tried unsuccessfully to get me to sit down and eat something. But she survived. The wound serious but not fatal. The kind of injury that would keep her out of active duty for a stretch but would heal. I sat in that corridor until a Virolith medic finally came out and told me, with a bluntness I had come to expect from her people, that Commander Voss was stable and had specifically requested that I be the first visitor allowed into the recovery ward. I walked in to find her propped upright in the medical bed, a bandage wrapped around her side, looking pale but very much alive and very much awake. "Marsh," she said, and there was something new in her voice, something unguarded that I had never heard from her before. "Commander." I stopped a few feet from the bed, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands. "You scared the hell out of me." "That was not my intention." "I know. That's kind of the problem." I dragged the single chair in the room closer and sat down, close enough that our eyes were nearly level. "You could have died, protecting me. After everything the High Marshal said, after everything you told me about what you can't afford to want, you still did it anyway." Illyra was quiet for a long moment, her silver-gray eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my chest ache. "I have spent 11 years of service believing that discipline meant the absence of feeling," she said finally. "That composure and restraint were the same thing as strength. I believed this because it is what I was taught, and because I had never encountered anything that made me question it. And now? Now I have discovered that in the moment, it mattered most. Calculation was not what moved me," she said. "You moved me. The thought of you being harmed moved me, faster and more completely than any tactical assessment I have ever made in my life. I do not know what to call that, except that it is the same thing you named, weeks ago, without meaning to." My throat felt tight. "Sweet," I said softly. "Sweet," she repeated, and this time there was no confusion in it. No request to hear it again, out of bewildered curiosity. This time it sounded like she understood exactly what the word meant, and had decided, against 11 generations of family expectation and the cold eyes of a High Marshal who would not approve, that she wanted it anyway. Word of what happened in Section 7 spread through the Larkspur faster than any battle report ever had, and this time it was not just gossip among the human crew or careful scientific curiosity from Ren Sable. This time even the Virolith, who had always kept their distance from anything resembling emotional display, found themselves asking questions they had clearly never expected to ask. I noticed it first in small ways. A Virolith technician named Corvin, who had barely spoken 2 words to me in 4 months, stopped by the engine bay to ask, in a tone of genuine confusion, why a human specialist would choose to shield an officer with his own body during a hull breach when standard protocol dictated seeking the nearest secure position. I explained, as best I could, that some decisions do not come from protocol at all, that sometimes you move toward the person you care about, because the alternative, standing safely aside while they are in danger, is simply not something you can live with. Corvin considered this for a long moment, then said that he found the concept inefficient, but not, he admitted, without a certain logic of its own. I took that as high praise, coming from him. Dr. Ren Sable was less subtle about his fascination. He cornered me twice in the following week with increasingly detailed questions about human emotional bonding, comparing notes from old Virolith historical records against what he called my anecdotal but valuable first-hand account. I answered what I could, though I told him more than once that I was hardly an expert on the subject, that I had simply said a word my mother used to say and had somehow ended up at the center of what felt like an entire cultural reckoning. "You misunderstand your own significance," Ren told me, during one of these conversations, as we stood in the observation lounge watching the stars slide past. "It was never only about the word, it was about what the word revealed. Commander Voss has spent her entire career demonstrating that restraint and strength are identical. Her survival of that engagement, and more specifically the reason for it, demonstrates something our doctrine has never accounted for. That feeling, far from being the flaw that led our ancestors into ruin, might instead be the thing that makes a person willing to give everything for someone else. That is not weakness. Our historians would not recognize it as such if they saw it plainly. You think this changes anything? Really changes anything? I mean beyond gossip on one small scout ship?" Ren considered the question with the same careful seriousness he brought to everything. "I think," he said, "that empires do not change because of grand speeches or sweeping reforms. They change because enough small, undeniable moments accumulate until the old explanation no longer fits the evidence. You and Commander Voss have produced one such moment. There will need to be more before anything shifts meaningfully at the level of doctrine. But moments have to begin somewhere." I thought about that a great deal in the days that followed, especially once Illyra was cleared for light duty and began, cautiously at first, allowing herself to be seen with me outside of strictly professional contexts. We ate meals together in the mess hall, without either of us pretending it was a coincidence. We talked in the observation lounge, about small things mostly, her questions about human customs growing less clinical and more curious, more personal, as the days went on. I watched her allow herself, bit by careful bit, to unclench from the rigid discipline that had defined every part of her for as long as she had served, and something in me settled every time I saw it happen. It was not without consequence, of course. Word eventually reached Fleet Command, as word always does, and a formal inquiry was opened into Commander Voss's conduct, the kind of bureaucratic process that could, in theory, end a career built across 11 generations of family service. High Marshal Kor herself returned to preside over part of that inquiry, cold eyes as unforgiving as ever, and I sat in the gallery during the proceedings with my stomach in knots, certain that all of this was about to come crashing down around the both of us. Illyra stood before that inquiry with the same steady composure she had always carried, but this time it did not feel like the armor it once had. This time it felt like something she wore because she chose to, not because she feared what might happen if she set it down even once. "You are aware," Kor said, during the formal questioning, "that your actions during the engagement constitute a clear deviation from established doctrine. You placed yourself at direct physical risk for a single crew member, an action inconsistent with the tactical calculus expected of an officer of your rank and lineage." "I am aware," Illyra said. "Do you offer any defense for this deviation?" There was a long pause, and in that pause I thought I saw something in Illyra's face that I had never seen before. Not fear, not the careful blankness of duty, but something that looked very much like resolve. "I offer no defense," she said, "because I do not believe a defense is required. I have spent 11 years believing that restraint alone constitutes strength. I have come to understand, through direct experience, that this belief was incomplete. Strength is not merely the absence of feeling. It is the willingness to act rightly in spite of, or because of, what one feels. I acted to protect a member of my crew. I do not regret that action, regardless of what it reveals about the state of my discipline, and I do not believe our doctrine is served by pretending such feeling does not exist within any of us. I believe it is served better by learning what to do with it." Hungrate. The silence that followed was different from any silence I had heard on that ship before. Even High Marshal Kor, for all her cold authority, seemed for a moment uncertain how to respond to an officer who had simply refused to apologize for the thing she was supposed to be ashamed of. The inquiry did not resolve quickly, and it did not resolve entirely in Illyra's favor, not in the tidy, satisfying way I might have hoped for. There were formal reprimands, notes added to her record, a period of restricted command authority, while fleet oversight reviewed her fitness for continued service. But there was no removal, no disgrace of the kind that had clearly haunted the back of her mind since childhood, and more importantly, there was no attempt to force her back into the person she had been before Section 7. What there was, instead, was a slow, quiet shift across the wider fleet as her story spread beyond the Larkspur. Other officers, human and Virilith alike, began to speak more openly about what had happened, some in careful, clinical terms that would not have looked out of place in one of Wren's reports, others simply as a story of courage that happened to involve an alien word for affection. I heard, months later, that other Virilith officers had begun quietly requesting cultural exchange postings alongside human crews, something almost unheard of before, driven by a curiosity about exactly the kind of bond that had nearly gotten Illyra killed and had, in the same breath, kept her crew alive. For my part, I did not think of any of it in terms of doctrine or fleet policy or historical turning points. Not most days. Most days I thought about smaller things. The way Illyra had started, hesitantly at first and then with more ease, to use the word herself, quietly, only when it was just the two of us, the color rising along her jaw every single time, as if her body had never quite gotten used to allowing itself the feeling, even after all this time. We stood together in the observation lounge one evening, months after the engagement, watching the same slow drift of stars we had watched 100 times before, and I felt her hand find mine without either of us making a show of it. "You never did explain," she said, "why humans use such a simple word to carry so much weight." "I don't think we ever fully explain it," I said. "I think you just have to feel it to understand it, which, from what I hear, you've gotten pretty good at." She was quiet for a moment, and then, very softly, in a voice that held none of the careful command distance she once used with me, she said the word herself, unprompted, without me having to say it first. "Sweet," she murmured, testing the shape of it in her own voice, the way she might test a new piece of equipment, cautious and precise, and entirely her own way of being tender. Then she looked at me, silver-gray eyes steady and unguarded, and said it again, this time meaning it plainly, without any hesitation left in her at all. "I had come to this ship as an engineer, assigned to keep a coolant relay from failing under fire. I left that observation lounge that night, understanding that some of the most important repairs a person can make have nothing to do with machinery at all, and that sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do, human or otherwise, is allow themselves to be changed by a single soft word, spoken without meaning to, that turns out to mean everything.